Hey, Strawyaker, hope you're doing well, and today we're back with some more Minecraft Dungeons. Well, kinda, because yet again, we are doing another tier list, this time with all the armor enchants in the game. So here I got the little tier list here, and I'm going to be ranking every enchantment in the game. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so up first is Acrobat, and this reduces the time between rolls up to 45%, which is actually pretty good. And I think this is a pretty solid enchantment, especially if you have something like, oh, I don't remember the enchantment on the bow, but when you roll it, like shoots out arrows in every direction, then this enchantment could be really good paired with that, and along with some of the other enchantments later on this list. So I'm going to put this in B tier. I could maybe see it being A tier because 45% is quite good, but I do think there are better enchantments, but definitely a strong B tier, maybe low A tier. Next is the Bag of Souls enchantment, and this is definitely an S tier enchantment if you have a soul build, because this increases the max number of souls that you can carry by up to 150%. So if you're using a soul build, then this is definitely a good one to have, because you're going to be able to hold a lot more souls. Up next is the Beast Boss enchantment, and this is, I don't know how to feel about this enchantment because it just makes your pets do extra damage, and I think the max is like 40% extra damage, which isn't like a ton of extra damage, and I don't use pets very often. So this is probably a C or a D tier. I think it could be useful, especially if you use a lot of pets, so it's probably going to go on C tier, but not the greatest. Also, before we get too much further into this video, I just want to say that first, this video will probably be a little bit longer than most of my other videos because I want to give my reasoning behind why I'm ranking what where. And second of all, this is of course just my opinion, so if I end up ranking like your favorite enchantment in a super low tier, don't be offended because these are just the enchantments that I like to use. Next is the Beast Burst enchantment, and this enchantment is actually quite good because when you use a health potion, it can make like your pets explode doing damage, and it can actually do a lot of damage. So I think this is better than the Beast Boss enchantment because it does a lots of damage. It's a little bit more based on your healing potion, which isn't great, but it can do tons of damage. Yet again, if you're not using like any pets or maybe just one pet, then I probably wouldn't go for this enchantment because there's not much use to it, and I think I'd rather have something else. But if you are using lots of pets, then this is definitely a really good one to have. Next is the Beast Surge enchantment, and I think this is yet again another really good one because when you use a health potion, it increases your pet's movement and attack speed by up to 150%, I believe, which is really good. And if you combo this with Beast Surge and you have a lot of pets, then that would be really good because then if you use a health potion, they explode and then they move really quick. So I could definitely see how that could be really helpful. Next is the Burning enchantment, and I really like this enchantment. I think it's probably a pretty strong A tier. It's not like super crazy, it doesn't do like tons of damage, but it is good consistent damage, and I like it quite a bit. Up next is the Chilling enchantment, and this one, I kind of have mixed feelings about it because it is pretty good. It can reduce movement and attack speed by up to 60%, which is actually quite good. It sends out like a blast every 2 seconds, and the chilling lasts for 1 second. So that's quite good. I don't think it's quite S tier. I do think it's pretty good, but I think there are some better enchantments, maybe like Snowball, that I'd rather have. But still really good, but I don't think it's quite S tier, so it's going into A. Next is the Cooldown enchantment, and this one's also really good because it reduces the amount of time, like the cooldown time on your artifacts by up to 38%, which is pretty good, especially if you get lucky and you have an armor with cooldown on it twice, because you can get that, then it's like, then your artifacts are coming back so quick. I don't think it's quite S tier because I feel like, you know, unless you're speed running, this isn't going to be super useful because, I don't know, I just feel like there's some better enchantments that you can get, but still definitely super helpful, and it's going to go into A tier, especially if you are speed running. You get double artifact cooldown like Boots of Swiftness, and you can just run the whole time. It's crazy. Up next is the Cowardice enchantment, and to be honest, this might be our first F tier. I don't think it's very good because when you're at full HP, then you can do up to 40% extra damage ranged and melee, which I don't see it really taking into effect that often because I feel like very rarely I'm at full HP unless I just barely use a health potion. But any times besides that, I'm like never at full HP, and then if I was, then I would just like have to use a bow, I feel like. And so I don't know, I just don't think it's very helpful because sure, you get to do extra damage, but it's not even that much extra damage. And the important thing about enchantments that I try to think about when I'm making these lists is that you're only allowed to have 3 enchantment slots at a time on armor, And I try to think about what I really want to have this cowardice enchantment maybe comboed with something else or have it taking up a slot. And I feel like that this one would not be worth taking up a whole slot because very rarely I feel like is it going to go into effect. Up next is the Death Barter enchantment, and I feel like this is a pretty strong S tier enchantment because it's quite overpowered, because if you upgrade it all the way, then it costs 50 emeralds to just basically give you an extra life. Instead of using like one of those totems and losing a life, it'll just bring you back at, I think, half health, which is pretty good. And it's actually an enchantment that I used for a long time on some of my old armor, and it saved me a lot of the time. Next is the Deflect enchantment, and I think this is probably either an A or B tier. It gives you up to a 45% chance to deflect incoming projectiles, which is actually quite helpful, especially in some boss fights. Then this enchantment comes in clutch. But for like everyday use, I probably want to keep it on my armor because there's not like there are ranged mobs, but I don't feel like there's a ton of them. I feel like there's a lot more melee mobs, and so I'd probably put this in B tier. It can be super helpful sometimes. Up next is the Electrified enchantment, and yet again, this is another rolling base enchantment, which I don't usually love. But basically, when you roll, it can zap up to 2 enemies, dealing like pretty high damage, like not huge, but pretty decent damage. And I feel like if you pair this with Acrobat and maybe like the Burst Bowstring or whatever that enchantment's called on the bow, and you get like a super heavy rolling build, then I feel like this one could be really good. Next is the Explorer enchantment. I think this is going to be our first D tier because it's not very good. It's basically for every 100 blocks you explore, you can regain a small percent of health, and the max tier is 1% of your health, which I feel like is nothing. And I feel like there are better enchants that help you regain your health. So I feel like this one just isn't very useful. I guess it could help you regain some health. Maybe you pair it with, I don't even know what. I just don't think it's very good, so it's going into D tier. Next is the Final Shout enchantment, and this one I've used a little bit, and when I used it in the past, I didn't love it, but I think it was mostly because I was using the wrong artifacts, because how this one works is when your health drops below 25%, it uses all your artifacts with like ignoring the cooldowns, and in max tier is every 8th second. So how I believe it works, because I haven't used it in a while, is if your health drops below 25% and it stays like that for a while, then it'll just keep using your artifacts every 8 seconds, which could be actually pretty good. I think it definitely depends on your artifacts, like I said. I don't think it's quite S tier just because you do have to be really low health for it to work, which I don't love, because when you're such low health, I feel like you're just going to die if you're that low. But it could definitely be really good, so it's going into A tier. Up next is the Fire Focus enchantment, and this one increases the amount of fire damage you do, or like if you're using something that deals fire damage like burning or fire aspect, or using like a flame quiver, then this will increase the damage you do by up to 75%, which is actually quite good. But I think it's going to go into C tier because if you're not using anything with fire, then like why would you need this enchantment? And even if you are, I feel like most of the time, unless you specifically build a build around fire, then it's not going to be very useful, because like at most maybe I'm using like one thing that's using like fire. Maybe I'm using the flame quiver or like fire aspect, and it's like, does it really make sense to have a whole enchantment just based on the one thing that I'm using that has fire? So pretty good, but not great. Next is the Fire Trail enchantment, and I think this is probably going to be a D tier enchantment because it's based on rolling, which yet again, if you have a roll heavy build, then this could be really good. But at the same time, I think there are better rolling enchantments like Electrified that actually do some pretty good damage, where this, I don't feel like it does that much damage. And so I think it's going to go into D tier. Up next is the Food Reserve enchantment, and I have mixed feelings about this enchantment because when you use a health potion, it can create random food items, up to 3 items, which is actually really good, except for if you're playing by yourself, because then it's like, why do I need those food items? I just used a health potion. I guess maybe if you're taking like constant damage, then that could be helpful. So it's going into C tier. This honestly would be a really good enchantment if you want to do like a healer based build and you were playing with other people. Then like, yeah, for sure this would probably be like an A or S tier enchantment. But where I always play by myself, and I feel like a lot of people do, this is just kind of a middle of the road C tier enchantment. Next is the Frenzied enchantment, and I don't really like this one because when you're less than half health, then your attack speed increases, so it could be good paired with Final Shout, except for the max increase of speed I believe is 30%, which I don't feel like is that much. Also, yet again, you have to be really low health, which I don't like. So to be honest, I feel like this is kind of a D tier enchantment because your attack speed doesn't increase that much. And it, like, maybe if it was attack speed and damage, then I could see how that could be really good. But where it's just like attacking a little bit quicker, I feel like, I don't know, that's not great. I could maybe just like use a death cap mushroom for that, and then I could be full health, then I could use it. Next is the gravity pulse enchantment. And yet again, don't really like this enchantment because basically I think it's every 4 seconds a gravity pulse like goes out and can pull mobs towards you, which really isn't that helpful in my opinion. I don't want the mobs to be close to me because that's when they can attack me. It's only helpful on like certain armors, like I think the sturdy shulker armor is one where it's like if you have like more than 4 mobs around you, then you take less damage. And I think maybe the stalwart armor or stalwart, whatever that armor is called, I think that's also one. I don't really remember. Then it's like, sure, this enchantment could be helpful, but I feel like most of the time it's an F tier enchantment because at least with the builds that I'm using and just in general, I don't want the mobs to be close to me. I want to kill them far away before they can hit me and attack me. Up next is the health synergy enchantment, and this one, when you use an artifact, you can regain up to 5% of your health, which is pretty good, I think, especially if you pair this with Final Shout, because then like you activate all your artifacts and you get some health back. But at the same time, if you're getting health back, then you stop using your artifacts, so I feel like that doesn't mesh very well. And in general, I feel like this is probably a pretty D tier enchantment because first of all, 5% health I don't feel like is a ton. Second of all, if you have artifacts like the firework arrow or something that have like a really long cooldown, then this isn't going to be taken into effect very often. I do think it could be helpful sometimes, like if you have like Boots of Swiftness where it's a really short cooldown, then this could be super helpful. Maybe even a C tier now that I think about it. That might actually be kind of helpful. I'm gonna move it up. Because yeah, if you have Boots of Swiftness, maybe like the cooldown reduction artifact, and you're using artifacts a lot, then you could constantly be getting health back, which could be actually pretty helpful now that I'm thinking about it. Up next is the Life Boost enchantment, and this one I think yet again is an S tier enchantment because each time you respawn, it grants you 33% extra health. It resets after each mission, but during that mission, you get 33% extra health. And I believe that stacks, so if you die like the 3 times, then you're going to be getting 33% extra health each time. And if you pair this with Death Barter, I'm pretty sure it works then too because you're technically respawning, I believe. I can't confirm that, but I am like 90% sure that is how that works. So if you pair these two together, then that is going to be super helpful because the more you use the Death Barter, the more health you're going to get, and yeah, it's super handy. Next is the Lightning Focus enchantment. It's the same as Fire Focus, except for it's lightning and it's going into C tier for the same reasons that Fire Focus did. Up next is the Luck of the Sea enchantment. I think yet again this is another S tier enchantment because it gives you a 30% increased chance to drop uniques, or for rare drops that would be rare to become uniques, which is quite helpful especially in late game like Apocalypse plus 25, where I think every drop has like 4 times of becoming a rare, and if each of those rare drops have a 30% chance to become a unique, then it's really easy to find uniques. This was a lifesaver when I was trying to find every unique in the game, and it could also be really good early game when you want to get like your first unique or just uniques in general because they're super fun to use. Next is the Lucky Explorer enchantment, and yet again this is another S tier enchantment because for every block that you explore, it gives you a chance to generate up to 5 emeralds, which is super helpful, especially if you combo that with Death Barter, because then you only need to activate 10 times, and then you get an extra life, which is super helpful. And I actually want to show you that here on my goat gear that I got before re-rolling enchantments was even a thing. I actually got Death Barter, Lucky Explorer, and Life Boost all on the armor just on its own. That's just the enchants that happened to be on it, which was super lucky. And I used this armor for a really long time because it was super overpowered. I got lots of extra lives, and overall these 3 enchantments, especially if you combo at least these 2 together, super helpful. Up next is the multi-roll enchantment, and I don't really love this enchantment just on its own, but yet again if you combo with the other rolling enchantments, And this one I would say is a must-have because it can grant you up to 4 extra rolls, which is super helpful. So it's going into A tier. If you're not using like a roll enchantment heavy setup, then this enchantment's not going to be very useful. But if you are, then this would definitely be a super good enchantment to have. Next is the Poison Focus enchantment, and again, it's the exact same as Fire Focus and Lightning Focus, but I'm actually going to say that this is one lower in D tier because I feel like there are less things that are poison focused. Like sure, like on bows and swords, you can like create the poison cloud, which is kind of helpful, but like there's no poison quiver, unlike with flame and lightning, there's a flame quiver and a lightning quiver, which is helpful. You can get the poison dipped arrow, but yet again, you have to have a separate enchantment for that, and you have to use a health potion. It's a whole thing. So I feel like this is one tier lower just because there is not as much stuff using poison, which kind of makes it less useful. Up next is the Potion Barrier enchantment, and this one is quite interesting. It's not one that I have used a lot, but I'd like to use it a little bit more. But when you use a health potion, you take 90% less damage for up to 9 seconds, which is actually kind of crazy. And if you combo with maybe some of the other enchantments that are based off the health potion, I think this one could be pretty good. I'm gonna put it in A tier, though I could see how it could be S because that is a lot less damage taken for a really long time, but still a really strong A tier enchantment, maybe even like creeping up a little bit towards S if you use it right. Next is the Prospector enchantment, and like in the other videos, I don't really like this enchantment because it just gives the mobs you defeat a higher chance to drop emeralds. Though I will say if you combo this with Death Barter, then it could be really good, but in my opinion, I'd rather have probably Lucky Explorer because it's a little bit more of a guaranteed thing maybe. I don't know, I think if you do use it right, it could be pretty good, so it's going into C tier instead of I think D tier is what I normally put it in, because if you do put it with Death Barter, then it could be pretty good, but on its own, it's not very good. Next is the Protection enchantment, and yet again, just with like sharpness and other things, it's a really good enchantment if you just need some good, solid damage reduction. It's not going to be quite S tier because the max amount of damage reduction is only 15%, which I don't feel like is very much, especially when you have stuff like Potion Barrier that's going to be 90%. Sure, protection is activated all the time, you're always going to have it, which is nice, but I feel like for 15%, I don't think it's quite worthy of S tier. Up next is the Reckless enchantment, and I don't know really how to feel about this enchantment because it reduces your health by 40% but can increase your melee damage by up to, I believe it's 9, nope, 6, let me check real quick. Yeah, by up to 90%, which is quite a lot of damage. That's a lot more damage that you would be doing, but it's a lot less health, so it kind of makes you like a glass cannon, especially if you combo with Pain Cycle like I think I've done in the past. Then it really makes you a glass cannon. You can do lots of damage, but I don't love the trade-off because I feel like you just die so frequently. Like when I tried using it, I just died a lot because I was such low health all the time. So I do think it's quite good if you pair it right with some other stuff, but I think it's going to be C tier because I don't love the trade-off. Next is the Recycler enchantment, and I think this is probably going to be another D tier enchantment, sadly, because for every like damage doing projectile, it says like it can craft a small quiver of arrows, but the max is every 10th projectile, which is like all right. Maybe if you have a level that has like lots of skeletons or a boss that shoots projectiles, something like that, where there's a lot of projectiles, then it could be good. So it's going to go into D tier because, I don't know, I feel like it just won't take into effect very often. It doesn't even give you that many arrows, and I think I'd rather have some other enchantments than this one. Next is the Rush enchantment. I think this is probably a B tier enchantment, especially if you're speedrunning, because for 1 second after you take damage, it increases your movement speed by up to 90%, which is pretty dang quick. You can get cooking. So I think this is a pretty strong B tier, especially if you are speedrunning like I said, and this is definitely a good enchantment to have. And if you're not speedrunning, then it's still fun to go quick. Up next is the Shadow Blast enchantment, and to be honest, I think this is probably an F tier enchantment because when leaving shadow form, it produces a powerful blast that damages nearby enemies, but the max tier is within a 4-block radius, which I don't feel like is a very big radius. Also, if you're not using something like the Satchel of Elixirs, then this enchantment isn't going to be going to affect very often, because how likely are you to be finding like shadow brews and stuff like that? So if you're not using the right stuff, this enchantment is totally useless, because it's like, well, it's not totally useless, but it's like small radius. I have to find shadow brew to even use it, and I think I'd just way rather have some different enchantments than this one. Next is the Shadow Surge enchantment, and this one is actually maybe a little bit more helpful than the Shadow Blast, but when you defeat mobs in shadow form, then it can produce up to 16 souls for that mob, which is like actually crazy. That's a lot of souls. But yet again, with Shadow Blast, how often are you going to be going into shadow form? I don't think very often. Maybe if you pair these two together, then that could actually be pretty good. I feel like this one's slightly more helpful than Shadow Blast if you're using a soul build. If you're not using a soul build, then this one is actually, no. I think this one's probably just as bad as Shadow Blast, because not only does it affect your like souls, so like if you're using a soul build, then it's like, okay, maybe you want to use this one because it's a lot of souls, but yet again, it's based on being in shadow form, which I don't like, because that's, you know, kind of a luck thing. You know, you don't know how often you'll be in it unless you are using the Satchel of Elixirs. And second of all, I don't know if I want this enchantment to be taking up one of my enchantment spots for my soul build, especially when there are some better armor enchantments for souls. So I don't know, probably F tier, maybe D tier, because it's just so many souls. Up next is the Snowball enchantment, and this is definitely a strong S tier. I love this enchantment. It's so good, because max tier, it activates every second, and it basically stuns, I believe, the mob closest to you, and it just will keep them stunned. If you have a max tier, they just can't attack you. And I can't tell you how many times this enchantment has saved my life from creepers, because the AI on this thing, unlike stupid golems and pets, it's actually pretty smart, because I believe it just gets anything that's closest to you. So a creeper will be rushing at you, maybe you don't have time to get out of the way, and Snowball, here it comes, it stuns them, and the creeper doesn't blow up and you have time to kill them. So helpful. I love this enchantment. It's just so nice to have. Next is the Soul Focus enchantment, and I really want to rank this one quite high, because if you're using a soul build, then this one's definitely overpowered, because it makes you do extra soul damage, which is, you know, you'd think really good if it's like some of the other focuses, and then be, you know, really good. But the maximum of damage that it'll do extra is only 30%, which is just, it's so sad, because if it was 75%, then this would definitely be like an A tier, maybe a B tier enchantment if you are using a soul build, because that's a lot of extra damage for souls. But 30%, no, it's going in D tier. That's just such low damage, and it's kind of making me rethink, you know, the Shadow Surge thing. Next is the Soul Speed enchantment, and somehow I didn't have this enchantment. I don't know how. Throughout all the armor that I have, which is quite a lot, I didn't have this one, which was kind of weird, so I have to use this weird image of it. Anyway though, this one is kind of good. It can increase your speed by, I think, 15% or something like that after you collect a soul. So if you have a soul build that's giving you lots of souls, then this one would be really good, because it can make you go really quick. I don't think it's great. I think there's maybe other soul enchantments that could be better, because this one's just making you kind of speedy. I think it's going to go into B tier, because I've seen soul builds that can just give you tons and tons of souls at a time, which means in theory you could just be like 15% faster all of the time, which would just be super fun. Yeah, probably B tier, maybe C tier. I'm kind of torn. Up next is the Speed Synergy enchantment, and after you use an artifact, this will increase your movement speed up to 3 seconds by 20% movement speed, so it can, you know, make it go a little bit quicker. And this one will probably be a B tier enchantment yet again, mostly just for the reason of speed running. This enchantment would be great, because if you got this, maybe the cooldown enchantment, you got Boots of Swiftness that activate basically instantly as soon as you get, you know, as soon as the Boots of Swiftness wear off, you can just use them again. Then this enchantment would be great, because you're using the artifact basically constantly. You're already quick because you got Boots of Swiftness, and then you're being extra quick because you're using an artifact. Yeah, definitely really good for speed running. Everything else, maybe not as great, but still pretty good. Next is the Surprise Gift enchantment. I don't really like this one, because it Gives you a chance after you use a health potion to create random consumables, and it's up to 150% chance, which is like, it's pretty good, but I feel like, I don't know, it's not great. I think it's going to go into D tier because, yet again, it's health potion reliant, which sometimes doesn't come back very quick, and I don't know. Most of the time, I don't feel like I need those consumables. Up next is the Swift-Footed Enchantment, and this one, after you roll, it makes you up to 50% faster. Yet again, though, it's kind of really only good for speed running, so it's going to be another B tier enchantment if you are speed running. And I think, yet again, this would be a pretty good enchantment to have. Like these, probably these 3 enchantments, or maybe these 2, and then a cooldown could be really good for speed running. Up next is the good old Thorns enchantment, and fully maxed out, this will do up to 200% damage back to the attacker. So if they attack you, 200% of their damage that they do unto you goes back to them, I'm pretty sure. So whatever damage they do to you, it goes basically twofold back to them, which is quite good. And I would say probably S or A tier. I think it's S tier. That's a lot of damage that it can do back to whoever's attacking you, and that could be, you know, super helpful. Next is the Tumblebee enchantment, and this one gives you up to 101% chance that when you roll, you can summon, you know, a little bee to come fight by your side. You can have up to 3 of them, which is actually really good. I know it's a rolling enchantment, but this one is actually worth it, I think, in my opinion, because first of all, I love having the bees. They're actually quite helpful. They can distract mobs. They do a good amount of damage. And, you know, it actually activates a really good percentage of the time. So I think this one's really worth it. Not quite S tier, but a good A tier enchantment. This one, I really like this one. I think it's super fun. But there we go. That now should be every enchantment in the game. And there are maybe a few things that I would change. Maybe the Shadow Surge could move up, and, you know, a couple things could move. But I think overall I'm happy with where everything's at. I'm probably going to leave it. But sadly, that will have to do it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new, I appreciate it if you subscribed. If you like the video, new videos every Thursday. And remember to stay jolly.